Have you ever wondered what it's like to have the fastest GPU in the world? Yeah, of course I did. That's why I got a 4090. But what about wondering what it's like to have the fastest GPU in 2015? Well, this is it. The Titan X. Imagine having one of these back then with like a 3-screen setup. Oh, never mind. Wait, what even is this card? Yo, it's codename Catfish, and as you can see, I am neither cat nor fish. I'm a robot. And this is apparently the GeForce GTX Titan X. This one's got NVIDIA's Maxwell architecture, like the 900 series cards, and the Nintendo Switch. The card released way back in 2015 at 1,000 USD. It's almost 10 years old as of this video. Thankfully, it's not Titan expensive anymore. I bought this at 200 bucks off of Amazon, but the card I got is missing some I/O ports. We'll take a closer look at it in a moment, but before we do, I gotta show you some other Titan cards, so you'll know which one we actually have. What you're seeing here is the original Titan, and this is a Titan Black. They both have Kelper architecture. This is a Titan X. It has Maxwell architecture, like the OG and the Black. It reads Titan on the card. And this is also the Titan X, but it actually reads Titan X on the card. It uses Pascal architecture. And this is a Titan XP, which also reads Titan X on the card. And it also uses Pascal architecture, but it goes even further beyond the Titan X with Pascal. I'm hoping that isn't all too confusing, right? Good, because we're actually using this one on here. It says that it only has an HDMI and 1 display port, just like the one we have here, compared to the normal one, which has 3 display ports and 1 DVI port, which would mean that this is an engineering sample. Looking at the rest of its stats, they're otherwise identical compared to the normal one. Both chips seem to be exactly the same. So the Titan X has 3072 cores and 12GB of GDDR5 VRAM. That may not seem like a lot now, but back then, that's like a thick ton of VRAM. The card can pull 250 watts. That's a lot of power draw for a GPU in 2015. Here's the card, but I don't have a box for it. Would an engineering sample even have its own box? As you can see, it's a dual slot card, but it's also got no back plate. How rude! You can see the 12 GDDR5 memory modules here. Neat. For cooling, it's a blower style card. It intakes air from the fan here, and it's pushed out from this side. I repasted the chip after checking it, so it should stay cool enough for our benchmarks. This over here is for SLI. It lets you connect other GPUs of the same kind to make a more powerful unit, but you don't see this feature anymore. For power, it's got one 8-pin and one 6-pin PCIe port, and for the I/O, it has one HDMI 2.0 port and one DisplayPort 1.2. I haven't seen any other differences between this card and the normal one beyond the I/O, but if you see any more, let me know in the comments. Popping into my test bench, here are the specs. We'll be running Windows 11 23H2, because it seems more stable than the newer update right now. The motherboard is a B760 MPG Sonic. It's still way past cool. The CPU is the i7-12700K, paired with 32GB of DDR5 RAM at 6400 MHz. The GPU is meant to be the Titan X Maxwell. It has 12GB of GDDR5 VRAM. The storage is a 4TB M.2. It's thick and fast enough, and it's all powered by a 750-watt gold power supply. As you can see, the other specs are all newer than the GPU, but I think it should all work out just fine. For our setup, the CPU will be using these defaults, and of course, the RAM will be clocked to 6400 MHz. For the graphics card, I'll adjust the fan curve so it stays cool. Since this card may be an engineering sample, I don't know if the performance will be different compared to a normal Titan X Maxwell, which I apparently don't have. But we're gonna go ahead and play some games to see how it does. Yep, it's playtime. I'm not really good at shooters, but the girls look pretty nice, so we'll start with the First Descendant. I started with medium settings preset, and as you can see, it is definitely not running at 60 FPS. But it is above 30, considering that this is a much newer game from 2024. For Titan X in 2015, I guess this isn't too bad, right? maybe I'm cheating a little bit with a newer CPU, but it shouldn't be holding the GPU back. You still want the 60 frames though, so let's flip on an upscaler. I tried out FSR Ultra Performance, and the game's looking all blurry and stuff, but it's averaging above 60 at least. The game can still hover under 60 though, so yeah, this won't do. Dialing it down to native low settings, the game is running much better now. It's now averaging at around 70 FPS. It's still dipped under 60 for a moment though, but for the most part, this is fine. Since these are the lowest settings we can go, this is about the best we're gonna get without an upscaler. I decided to tweak the settings a bit. I upped a few settings from low preset, and then flipped on FSR quality. With these tweaks, I think the game is running pretty ideal now. It's averaging above 60, and it hasn't really gone under yet. We also get some better shadows, and most importantly, the girls are looking very nice.
Wanna feel a chill?
Now, this game seems fun, but I heard that the grind for characters and skins are a real pain. Kinda like Warframe. I mean, obviously I can see why some people go for them. If I ever get the time, maybe I'll play this game more in the future. Let's see how this Titan X fares against Cyberpunk. I'll run the benchmark tool at various graphic settings and show you my results. For the native resolutions, Ultra averaged at 35 FPS, but the minimum was just a hair under 30 frames. High settings stayed above 30 frames, and it averaged at 40. Medium settings averaged in the high 40s, and low settings averaged just under 60 frames. Unless you're fine with 30 FPS gaming on high settings, we won't be able to have a solid 60 plus frames without using an upscaler. I tried XeSS Ultra Performance on low settings, but it actually performed worse than native settings. Is the card too old? Is it missing a feature? I don't know. With FSR 2 and 3, we actually got performance improvements. Low settings with FSR 3 quality seems like it'll be promising. And besides the performance modes, all the other settings dipped under 60 in some way. If we enable FSR 3's frame generation, we get some cool results. Low settings with FSR 3's performance brings the average all the way up to 140 FPS. The game looks fairly decent too. I think that's pretty neat. Besides native anti-aliasing, the others manage to stay above 60 frames. Yay! But what about actual gameplay though? Well, I'm really liking high settings with FSR 3 quality and frame generation. The game looks fine, while averaging in the high 80s, and it also stays plenty above 60. I think these settings are pretty ideal, for me at least. But what if you don't like fake frames? Well, medium settings with FSR 3 balance seems to be okay. It dipped under 60 once in my play session, but otherwise it's averaging in the high 60s, and the percent lows are pretty decent too. You could also try FSR 3 performance if you're okay with scaling from a lower resolution. This game's been out for about 4 years now, and has been more optimized over time, so it's at least good to see it runs okay on the card. That said, you know what this game needs? Rebecca DLC. Then just maybe I'll play this game more. NieR Automata came out in 2017, about 2 years ahead of the Titan X Maxwell's release. Oh, by the way, the frame rate caps at 60 frames. So for 1080p, the settings I found to be the most ideal with this game is with high settings preset, but with the MSAA set to ×2. The FPS stays pretty consistent at 60 frames. Even on this moving roller coaster, the lowest it dropped to was 58 frames during this boss cutscene. If I didn't already have a 4090, I'd be playing on these settings. The game didn't perform too well with the MSAA set to ×8. It's averaging closer to 50 here. For 1080p, that's no good for me at least. When I was testing out medium settings preset, the game was running very well. In fact, it was running so well, it averaged at 61 frames, while maxing at 59 frames. What does that mean? Well, either some cosmic ray from space caused a bitflex somewhere and is fucking with me, or MSI Afterburner isn't afterburning. I tried 1440p with high settings using SMAA. The game's actually performing very well, averaging at 60 with no problem, though it still dipped down with enough explosions on screen, but otherwise the game seems to be completely playable. I also tried 4K high settings with no anti-aliasing. The game's averaging in the high 30s. It sure feels like I'm playing on a console though. Gross. The performance didn't really go under 30 until I blew up this tech. GG. You may prefer low preset settings over higher settings for 4K, since it seems to do a better job staying above 30 frames. Overall, the game plays very well on the GPU at both 1080p and 1440p, and can fairly do 30 FPS in 4K, but it sure did show us that anti-aliasing can really affect performance. I haven't played this game before, so we're trying out Lollipop Chainsaw. For graphic settings, it's got fidelity and performance modes. Is that really all the options? I'ma play using the OG mode. I think RePOP is the centered version, right? We're playing the prologue stage with fidelity mode. We can see that the game's frame rate is in the 40s, which is kinda lame, but at least the combat feels pretty dope. It feels like a PS3 game. That's because it was. So here, it often switches between actual gameplay and in-game cutscenes. Its performance somewhat jumps above and below 60. In this phone cutscene, the FPS went up to 78 frames. That's what a phone looks like? Shocking, right? Though the game's not averaging at 60, the percent those avoid going under 30 here. It's def playable, but we want more frames, right? Flipping on performance mode, it's now averaging near 120 FPS, which is way over the 45 average we got in fidelity mode. In gameplay, the frame rate's bouncing around the hundreds and the 120s, and the percent those are better too, going well above 60 FPS. Cutscenes still vary, but the frame rate went as high as 180 FPS. That's a lot of frames. The game does look somewhat worse though. Most notably, the shadow quality is much lower. There's obviously a clear gap between fidelity and performance modes. If only there was a way to tweak more options for the graphics. Well, I found graphic settings in this ini file. These are the setting defaults for both fidelity and performance modes. I'm guessing 3 is the highest, and 1 is the lowest. After tweaking the settings and playing around, I think these are the most ideal settings without compromising too much. The resolution quality is still at 100, the textures are maxed out too, and we actually have some decent shadows, so the game still overall looks good. At least I think so. The game dipped under 60 once after this sparkle hunt animation, but otherwise, it performs near or well above 60 frames, topping in the 120s, and the percent those are also closer to 60, which I think is fine enough here. I guess my only real complaint about this game right now is that the rest of the graphic settings are not in the options, kind of like we're playing on a fucking console. In a way, it's also a good thing, since this game came from the PS3 and 360, those are actually good consoles. I tried the Monster Hunter Wilds beta when it was still available to play, but it was all black behind the title screen. That's no good. We can see the menus though. Under the graphics tab in options, you could fix the picture by turning off upscaling. You could also use FSR 3, but you have to set the upscaling to native AA, which actually lets you use frame generation. We're sure gonna need it. We'll play at 720p resolution, and we'll be playing the game using frame generation on lowest settings. The computer's using 6 gigs of VRAM here. It's a good thing we have 12. Yeah, I'm using Insect Glaive again. So what? Looking at the frame stats, it looks like it's averaging above 30 FPS, and it seems like for most of my play session, it stayed above 30, but if you couldn't already tell by the percent lows in the frame time, the game feels... Well, yeah, I don't like the performance very much. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it's like this everywhere on the map, except maybe here. Here, everything is kinda smooth. The Insect Glaive nerfs suck, but I do like the focus mode stuff. It's pretty neat, but it does feel like I have to relearn the Insect Glaive. Hopefully I can get used to it. I tried out a software called Lossless Scaling, which gives us more scaling options, and even frame generation. Now we have double frame generation, from both in-game and lossless scaling. As you can see, the game is, smooth. Well, looking at this gives me a headache, so I don't think I recommend this. Intriguing though. So yeah, I guess the game is playable at the absolute bare lowest settings, though I wouldn't really call it a pleasant experience. It'd probably motivate you to get a newer, better graphics card, but we'll see if the game's performance improves when the game actually releases. The game seems fun though, so I'll be looking forward to it. Zenless Zone Zero became my second favorite Hoyo game behind Honkai Impact third, and unlike the rest of the Hoyo games right now, you finally have the option to use unlimited FPS. I decided to benchmark this first part Blitz mode of Hollow Zero on high settings. Wanna take a guess on what the performance is like? Well, here's a hint. Take a look at NieR Automata. Adorable, right? When she attacks, she's pretty much moving all over the place. Yep, that's the best way to describe the performance. It's all over the freaking place. The FPS jumped between 60 to as high as 183 frames. At least it didn't go below 60. The 1% low is alright, but the 0.1% low is really taking an L. What happened? The frame time is jumping between 8 and 16, which I don't think is really a big deal. You'd be pickier about it if it was a fighting game. I went to try out 1440p, and to avoid going under 60, I'ma be using these settings. So as you can see, the performance is still all over the place, but now it's averaging in the hundreds, and we were able to avoid going under 60. The 1% low is above 60 this time. The 0.1% low is still taking another L, but I guess it shouldn't matter much here. It's fine. We'll try 4K with the absolute lowest settings, plus the low preset still had some things on high and medium. As you can see, it's averaging at 60 FPS. Well, it was. And what really sucks is that the game often performs under 60. You can't really get any better than this unless you want to adjust the rendering option, which I really don't like adjusting, but whatever works I guess. Yeah, I think you're better off with 1080p using the high preset settings, or 1440p with custom settings, as both of those can better retain 60 while still looking good. There's just something off about it when it's not 60 or above. Oh, and by the way, King E is pretty dope. I think she's the best girl in this game. Black Myth Wukong looks intimidating to benchmark, but we'll try it at 1080p. It has a benchmark tool, but it's a separate app from the game. For now, I'll just focus on the game itself. So for the graphics settings, it recommends a low settings preset with FSR and frame generation, plus the graphics scaling is set to 33%. No scaling presets this time. We'll do the prologue stage, since it looks demanding enough with those giants and the buttload of mobs on screen. As you can see, it's Shuring's running at 60 FPS, more like the 50s, and keep in mind, this is with frame gen and 33% scaling with FSR. The 1% low is doing okay at least. In terms of overall smoothness, I wouldn't say it's terrible. It's better than what we had to deal with in the Monster Hunter Wilds beta. Then again with that game, we couldn't get scaling to work. There's not much more to help improve the frame rate with this game. Lowering it to 720p is just gonna make it look worse than it already does with the scaling. Maybe you can take a shot with 900p? In the chapter after the prologue, Chapter 1, we get a huge breather. The performance actually looks very promising, averaging near 100 FPS. Wow. But I doubt it'll stay like that throughout the game if there are other scenarios like the prologue. I'd like to show you more of this game, but right now, this guy's kicking my ass. Maybe another time after I get good. If the sporadic frame rate still bothers you, just remember that the journey itself is more important. Hey, who knows? Maybe you'll enjoy the different frame rates in each area. I mean, it's not like the game is completely unplayable after all, right? Let's end this with an older game, Skyrim. We'll bench a special edition on Steam. The settings of the game are in its launch menu.
Hey, you.
Oh, right, the prologue. Actually, this could be a good place to benchmark, so we'll start at the chopping block at 1080p ultra settings, and make our way into the keep. If you guessed the game would run at 60 FPS sharp, you'd be correct, cause it normally caps at 60, the percent those are near 60 as well. The game's pretty much performing flawlessly, even when burning alive. That's lit. So how about we try 1440p on ultra settings? As you can see, it's pretty much performing the same as it did in 1080p. The game is running at 60 FPS sharp. You know, it would have been nice to have this kind of performance back in my college days. Ow! Wait, what the hell happened? Let's try 4K Ultra next. It should give the graphics card more of a challenge, right? Well, it sure did. Damn it. Now the game's averaging within the 50s. Like when we got burnt by that dragon, it also burned down the frame rate all the way to 30 FPS. That's no good. When inside here, it managed to stay at 60, at least for the most part. I tried the lowest settings with no anti-aliasing, and talk about being lit to being burnt. The frame rate still burned down to the 30s. I don't think there's much we can do here. I think you're better off playing this game on high or medium settings with no anti-aliasing. On high settings, the performance is a little sensitive, sometimes dipping under 60, otherwise it seems to average at 59 or 60 FPS. On medium settings, besides when we get burnt, performance seems stable at 60, probably the closest we'll get to ideal in 4K. Overall, the game runs pretty well on this card, but with this game, you'll probably want to use some mods. Some mods could affect performance, like additional maps, mobs, and of course, graphic and performance enhancement mods. When Elder Scrolls 6 releases, I sure hope it'll be as good as Skyrim somehow, but I'll keep my expectations low for the time being. So from the benches we saw, this Titan X Maxwell has no problem playing older games, but it was also able to play many newer games in some way as well. Certainly not at all at max settings though. The Monster Hunter Wilds beta was a huge drag. To be fair though, it was a beta. Hopefully the game gets more optimized upon release, and that we don't get a black screen while scaling the resolution of the card. It wasn't a problem on my newer GPUs. Games like Black Myth Wukong showed us that upscalers like FSR and frame generation could really give more life to a graphics card. Barely in this case, but it worked. Still, I do wish some developers didn't use them as a crutch to avoid optimization on newer hardware though. I mentioned this before, but the Titan X Maxwell icon may not have similar performance compared to the normal one. I think the only ones who would be interested in this card in particular would be collectors and content creators. If it was a normal Titan X Maxwell, I don't know if I would recommend it anyway. As capable as it is, it's almost 10 years old. The 3060 may be a better pickup. Or, maybe if Intel's Arc E580 is good, that could be a much better deal. I hope it is. I'll be looking forward to it. So what do you think about the Titan X Maxwell? Do you have a Titan X Maxwell? Do you think the Titan X Maxwell stands a chance in 2025? Do you also happen to have a rare graphics card? Let me know in the comments. So thanks for watching this video. This was something different. It feels like benchmarking each game was a project on its own. If you like this video, or you happen to find it useful in some way, consider hitting the like button and subscribing. And don't forget to share the video. Remember, with the power of overpowered old graphics cards, I can become best girl. It's weird having this card, but if I ever get a retail version of the Titan X Maxwell, it could be fun pairing it with this one for an SLI experiment. Yep, that should be everything. Bye!